Good afternoon. My name is Dr. Peter Murray, and I'm a recovering playwright, a wannabe novelist, and I'm here in my capacity as a senior lecturer in the School of Media and Communication at RMIT University. Welcome to this glorious venue and this sold-out event delivered by RMIT University in partnership with the Wheeler Centre. First, I'd like to begin by acknowledging that we're gathering this afternoon on the unceded lands of the peoples of the Woiwurrung and Boonwurrung language groups of the Eastern Kulin Nations. Sovereignty was never ceded, and I would like to pay my respects to ancestors and elders and, of course, to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people here this afternoon. As we move into Reconciliation Week, I think it's a great moment to remind ourselves how much work and more work is needed before we can arrive at a place where we are a just and reconciled Australia. So it's been a big week for the literary arts in Melbourne, and I'm a buzz, you can probably tell. And I can see that you are a buzz as well. Last night was a significant announcement of an annual literary prize that we all look forward to. And then, of course, today we have this. So I can see, well, I can't really. I'm going to pretend that I can see that the writers are here and the readers are here and the scholars of creative writing are here. And I can also confirm that the members of the book clubs are here. And I'm going to go out on a limb now and I'm going to suggest that there's a liberal sprinkling of lesbians and queers in the house. So we're very proud to be able to present events like these in partnership with the Wheeler Centre, and these events are a genuine expression of our shared values around the celebration of and the showcasing of new voices and established voices, and a commitment to public-facing cultural events that really celebrate the power of writing and of words and of ideas. Now, forgive me a tiny fangirl moment because this is a really big deal for me and I've gone to a lot of trouble. Encountering Jeanette Winterson's writing as a young wannabe writer and teacher was a profound and formative experience for me. Jeanette doesn't know it, but I've seen her present all over the world, including in Paris and up the road at the Nightcat in Fitzroy. I'm not a stalker, but I am a devout fan. And if I add that her book, Written on the Body, played a pivotal role in the courtship between myself and my partner of 30 years, you will know something of what today means to me. Hi, Jane. So, as a writer, as a reader, I want to acknowledge that how fortunate we are to be able to have in our midst this afternoon to honour a significant anniversary in her own writing life and to reflect on her extraordinary contribution as a writer of note. When I think about Jeanette Winterson, I think about a pyrotechnician with the pen whose fire and light continues to dazzle and illuminate in many myriad ways. Please welcome to the stage Jeanette Winterson.
Hello, everybody. Hey. Hello. It's very good to see you. I hope you can see me a bit better than I can see you. But it's great to be here in Melbourne, in this beautiful city, and thank you for coming out on such a sunny afternoon. After a week of deluging, I thought nobody will come. They'll all be doing other things, but you're here. Fiction is a set of possibilities. When we read fiction, we're allowed out of our situation, out of our circumstances, out of our gender, out of our age, out of our own time. You know, if you want to time travel, the best way to do it is fiction, where we can move around in space, where we're not confined to this bounded condition that is the body, where we can go where we like and be free. And these endless possibilities offered by fiction remind us of a really important truth, more important now, perhaps, than at any time. And that is that it's all a story. It's all a work in progress. That life isn't fixed. Outcomes themselves are not fixed. That society progresses and changes because we change the story that we're telling about ourselves, about the way we live, about who we want to be. And that really matters. And we're in a time now, largely coming across from America, where a world where everything is fixed, some nightmare version of the 1950s, or maybe Margaret Atwood's Gilead. A world where there is gender essentialism and masculine energy and feminine energy, and that there is some perceived way of living, a normal way of living, is suddenly on the ascendant again. And what fiction reminds us of is that this is not a right reading at all, that all of these things are stories, that the way we live, it's not something that we're subject to like the laws of physics, It's not a law like gravity. Nothing you can do about that, whoever you are, wherever you are. You're subject to the law of gravity. But the way we live is not a law like gravity. The way we live is propositional, and we make it up as we go along. And one of the beautiful things about fiction is that as we read the story, we might become outraged at the fate of the characters in there, especially if you're in 19th century fiction where you see women's lives being scaled down from full size to miniature, as though this was a perfectly natural happening. We might be angry at the circumstances that we read about in the story. Why is this happening? And this gives us courage to see our own lives differently. What are my circumstances? What are your circumstances? Are they as fixed and intractable and impossible as I think they are? Or is there another way out? And of course, often in fiction, especially if it's a tragedy, things don't end well for whoever it is that's in that novel. They can't. But it may mean that things will end better for those people who are reading that novel. There's a lovely story about Madame Bovary, Flaubert's novel Madame Bovary, which was published in Paris in 1856. And soon after it came out, a new disease appeared called Bovaryism. I'm not making this up. It was a disease that only affected women. A bit like that other disease, anorexia scholastica, which only affected women who studied maths. It's true. So Bovaryism appeared, and all the men were running around saying, "Eek, keep your wife away from this contaminating and poisonous literature." And of course, things in Madame Bovary don't end well for Madame Bovary. But the women who read it suddenly realized that they weren't atomized and isolated. They needn't be guilty or afraid, thinking nobody else was like them. They weren't crazy or mad or bad or some seductress or temptress, somebody who couldn't live within the confines of her marriage. They realized that there were other women like themselves, suffering like themselves, not because there was anything wrong with them, but because the structural impossibility of their lives, of their marriages, forced them into conditions where they could not thrive and barely survive, and where at that time the one and only thing you could do apart from killing yourself was have an affair. And so we should never underestimate what literature can do, directly and indirectly. People often say to me, "Oh, do you ever think about your audience?" And I say, "Never." Sorry. But you can't, because everything you do creatively is a message in a bottle. You throw it overboard, you don't know where it will wash up. You don't know who's going to open it and read it. You don't know the effect it will have on anybody, anywhere, at any time. And look, I'm standing here talking to you 40 years after Oranges Are Not the Only Fruit, which seems extraordinary to me. What happened? And it's still there. It's still a message in a bottle. It's still speaking to people. And because you cannot know where your work will go, this strangely should give all of us hope about the work that we do, whether it's creative work, whether it's activism, political work, whatever it is, any way that you're trying to improve the world. It might be your charitable giving, I don't know, you know. But we cannot see the results necessarily. And our world wants instant results, instant dopamine hits, instant A leads to B. And actually, things don't really work like that. And so, please, this is just for all of you. Remember that you cannot know where your actions will land, where something as simple as just helping somebody one day, smiling at them, maybe when they're down, offering a word, doesn't even have to be a big thing. We cannot know. And with creative work, it's especially so. It will land, and it will land somewhere surprisingly. I find I have a lot of young people who've found me and read me. They have different lives, different circumstances, not mine. And yet in there is something that speaks to them. And this really matters to me because 40 years ago, when I was contemplating writing Oranges, I knew that I did not want to be tethered by either biography or biology. I find those things inadequate explanations for who we are and for how we might develop into a human being. And everything is so often biography and biology. But beyond that, of course, is the world of the imagination. And it's in the world of the imagination that things become possible in a completely different way. And for me, as that young kid, adopted, brought up in a crummy northern town with mad Pentecostal parents who thought they were going to get a boy and then got me instead. And you know, my mother was told, you must tell your daughter that she's adopted, because this was like kind of the new normal. People had to tell their kids that they were adopted, which is why, I suppose, she used to say, the devil led us to the wrong crib. It's one way of finding out. She thought she was getting a little boy called Paul, and she got me instead. But of course, what she got was an invention of her own. I had a new name, I had a new identity, I had a new family. You know, it's like being a criminal on the run. Nothing from the past remained. There I was with a new life, everything wiped out to begin again. And anybody here who is adopted or has been through the care system knows that it's like arriving at the theatre after curtain up, or with the first few pages of the text ripped out. There's a part of you which is utterly unknown and often unknowable. But into that space, I realised that as this was already an invention, but not mine, it might be a good idea if I invented myself, or at least reinvented myself, found a self that I could be. And this gave me my early warning signal about narrative, because I was trapped in their narrative, the narrative of my parents, the narrative of the times I was born in, my own gender, my own circumstances. And it felt like one of those rooms in Edgar Allan Poe, you know, where the walls come in and the ceiling comes down, and you know it will crush you. So what can you do? And that's when I realized that if I could read myself as a fiction as well as a fact, I could change the story, because I am the story. And I learned this not from any self-help book, because there weren't any back then, but simply from my reading in the Accrington Public Library, when that was back in the day when libraries had books. It's very strange for young people, but they did. And there was a huge shelf at the back, English literature in prose, A to Z. So I started at A, and it's quite good at the beginning, isn't it? Because you get Austen, the Brontes, you get Conrad, Dickens, George Eliot. You know, you feel quite encouraged at the start of the alphabet, and you think, oh, I'll carry on. You know, things wobbled when I got halfway through, and it was Nabokov. Never mind. And I thought, why is he so disgusted about mature female bodies? I thought they were very beautiful. But I had no feminism then, I just had bewilderment. But in there, along those shelves, suddenly I wasn't a poor kid with nothing going for her. I could be Heathcliff, Huck Finn, Aladdin, Hotspur. I wasn't confined by biography or biology. There were worlds adjacent to mine that I could inhabit and find in there strength, chance, a chance to push out of who I was and what I was. And it was Mrs. Winterson didn't allow books into our house because she really was suspicious of secularism in any shape or form. So you could have the Bible, which is 66 books actually, although in our case only 65, because she never read from the Song of Solomon, because that's got the dirty bits in it. So we did have that, which she read every morning and every evening out loud, standing on her feet, King James Version. And so we go from Genesis right through to the book of Revelation, then we get 2 weeks off while we considered our position. Because by then everybody's been thrown into the fiery pit and it's all gone wrong, except for the ones for whom it's gone right, which presumably would have been us. But I was never sure about that story either. And there, in not being able to bring books into the house, the library was my escape, because Mrs. Winterson, naturally, like the rest of us being a woman of contradictions, loved murder mysteries. And I had to go down there and drag back her weekly sack of Ellery Queen and whatever she could get, whatever I could get from the murder mystery shelf. And when I challenged her on this, but why she could have them and why we couldn't, she said, well, you know, if you know there's a body coming, it's not so much of a shock. And then, not happy with this, pushing further, why can't I bring books back from the library? The trouble with a book is that you never know what's in it till it's too late. And I thought, too late for what? What is in these marvellous, exploding, forbidden objects that are so powerful? So unwittingly, of course, she'd given the game away, because she told me that there was out there, free, was this stuff that I could get at, that she didn't want me to get at, and that there were things in it, once I'd read them, well, it would be too late. Well, I thought that was all right. I was willing to take the chance, take the risk. But some of you who've read my stuff know that I had a job on the markets when I was at school. Everybody had a job on the markets. And so I used the money from that evening packing up and Saturday work to buy books myself, things that I loved, and I used to wrap them in sticky back plastic, bring them home secretly. And you will know, any of you, you've got children, I expect, if you had a single bed standard size and a collection of paperbacks standard size, you can fit 74 per layer under the mattress. So that's what I did. And then my mother began to notice that her daughter's bed was rising visibly, like the Princess and the Pea. And one night, she was doing her usual rounds. You know, we lived in a 2-up, 2-down terrace. You know the kind of thing when the British arrived in Australia and there was an unlimited amount of room, what did they do? They built 2-up, 2-down terraced houses, didn't they? Just like at home. Oh, it's unbelievable. Every time I come here, I look at them and I think the British are insane. Anyway, they did, because they needed all to be huddled together and it needed to look like Manchester, where I was born. So there she is, going up and down our 2-up, 2-down little terraced house with a flashlight. Now, we did have electricity. But at night, Mrs. Winston preferred to go up and down with a flashlight because it lent a whole Hitchcock air to the entire episode. And you knew she was behind the flashlight and you could see her slippers coming towards you under the beam. But you never knew quite why or what she was going to do. And as she was an unpredictable and disturbing woman, I think it was really to keep us always in a state of suspense. I think it's why my dad did shift work. It just meant he'd get out of the house sometimes, as unpredictable as her. Anyway, she was wandering around with the flashlight and she came into my bedroom. I was fast asleep. And then sticking out the corner was the corner of a book. Oh dear. Anyway, she pulled it out, and it was so bad for me because it was D.H. Lawrence, Women in Love. And she knew Lawrence was a Satanist and a pornographer. And she started pulling the books out. And of course, I fell off the bed and the dog's barking and it's the middle of the night. So she opened the window of my little bedroom and then she just sort of chucked them all out into the yard. Little yard, you've seen them all. The British love a little yard. You know, I could have had thousands of acres out the back door, but no, let's have a yard. So I had a yard, us, and there they all were, thrown into the bottom of the yard. And then she took the kerosene stove and just poured it over and set them on fire, the lot. And I remembered that cold Saturnian January night, and I watched all my books go up in flames. And I didn't sleep anymore. Mrs. Winston did. She went back to bed very satisfied. In the morning early, I was down there poking around, and all that were left were sort of fragments, really. Words separated from their context, but words that became talismanic, and I put some of them in my pocket. It suddenly didn't matter anymore that there was a story. It just mattered that there were words. And I realized two things that morning. First, that anything that is outside of you can be taken away at any time. Only what's inside of you is what you really own, what you can really depend on, what you can really take with you. And what would you take with you if you suddenly had to leave, like so many displaced peoples in the world? What stories would you know? What poems could you recite? What images would be there to hold you up in difficult times? Would you have outsourced everything and have nothing? Or would you have inside you enough to help you and others go forward? And so I'd started to learn text after that because I thought, well, if I memorize things, she'll never know because she doesn't know what's there. And that's what I started to do. And of course, I come from an oral tradition, so it was much easier to memorize things. Churches are all about memorizing things. You have to, tons of the Bible. So that's what I did. But also that morning, looking at this just disaster, this bonfire, these ashes, this loss of everything that I'd tried to keep for myself, the stories that were all gone. I thought, fuck it, I can write my own. And I did. I'm going to read to you a little bit because with Oranges Are Not the Only Fruit, you know, that 40 years, it's strange for me coming back to it. Sometimes people say, did you ever read it again? And I said, no. I mean, as you know, I did approach the material 23 years later in Why Be Happy When You Could Be Normal, because I wanted to revisit Winterson World, but from some different angles. And I keep thinking I'll be done with this story, but somehow I never am. And we're making a musical of it at the moment. I know, it is funny, isn't it? I think so too. But let's hope. If it's good, I'm sure it'll come over here. If it's not, you won't have to worry. Let's have a look. Here's a fun bit. Here we are. Let's have a look at Winterson World. Okay. The heathen were a daily household preoccupation, and my mother found them everywhere, particularly next door. And they tormented her as only the godless can. But she had her methods. Next door hated hymns, and she liked to play the piano, an old upright with pitted candelabra and yellow keys. So one Sunday morning, just as we got in from communion, we heard strange noises, like cries for help, coming from next door. I took no notice, but my mother froze behind the radiogram and started to change colour. And Mrs. White, who'd come home with us to listen to the World Service, immediately crushed her ear against the wall. "What is it?" I said. "I don't know," said Mrs. White, "but whatever it isn't holy." My mother didn't move. "Have you got a wine glass?" said Mrs. White. My mother looked horrified. "No, for medicinal purposes only, of course." My mother went to a high cupboard and reached down a box from the top shelf. This was her war cupboard, and every week she bought a new tin to put it in. She was a prepper, wasn't she? I didn't know this, but she was. Mostly it was full of black cherries in syrup and special offer sardines. She was a prepper. She gave Mrs. White the wine glass. Mrs. White slithered up and down the wall and along the skirting board. "We've just had that wall decorated," said my mother. "Oh, well, it stopped," said Mrs. White. But at that moment, another burst of wailing came from next door. It was very clear this time. "They're fornicating," said my mother, rushing to put her hands over my ears. "Get off!" The dog started barking, and my dad, who'd been on nights that Saturday just gone, came down in his pyjama bottoms. "Put some clothes on," said my mother. "Next door's at it again." I bit my mother's hand. "On a Sunday, too," said Mrs. White. "You'd think they could wait till tomorrow." Suddenly, outside, we heard the ice cream van. My mother said, "Go and get 2 cornets and a wafer for Mrs. White." I ran off. I didn't know quite what fornicating was, but I'd read about it in Deuteronomy. And I knew it was a sin. But why was it so noisy? Because most sins you do quietly so as not to get caught. I bought the ice creams and I decided to take my time. And when I got back, my mother had opened the piano and she and Mrs. White were looking through the redemption hymnal. I passed round the ice creams. "It stopped," I said. "For the moment," said my mother. As soon as we'd finished, my mother wiped her hands on her apron. "Ask the Saviour to help you, we'll sing that. Mrs. White, you be the baritone." The hymn had a rousing chorus that moved my mother to such an extent that she departed entirely from the notation of the redemption hymnal and instead wrought her own huge chords that sounded the length of the piano. No note was exempt. And by the time we got to verse 3, next door had started to bang on the wall. "Oh, listen to the heathen," said my mother, jubilant with her foot furious on the hard pedal. "Sing it again." And we did, while the heathen, driven mad by the word, rushed away to find what blunt instruments they could to pound the wall from the other side. And some of them ran into the backyard and they yelled, "Stop that bloody racket!" "On a Sunday," said Mrs. White. My mother leapt from the keys and rushed into our backyard to quote the scriptures. And she found herself staring at the eldest son, who had a lot of spots. "Lord, help me," she prayed. And a piece of Deuteronomy flashed into her mind. "The Lord will smite you with the scurvy and the itch and with the boils of Egypt, of which you cannot be cured." And then she ran back inside and slammed the door. Now then, who's for a bit of dinner? Of course, things unravelled dramatically in Winterson world once I'd fallen in love with another girl, because it never occurred to me that this would be a problem. You know, it's often forgotten, especially now in this increasing, crushing distaste that's reviving itself against any sexual expression that isn't heterosexual expression, it's often forgotten that the feelings are all the same. It's just the object of the feelings that is different. But we all suffer in the same way. We all want somebody to love. We want somebody to love us. We hope we're good enough. We hope we can keep it together. You know, we cry when we're hurt. We laugh when we're happy. It's all the same. And brought up to believe that God is love and that that is the most important statement in the Bible, and I believe it is, it didn't occur to me that love could be bounded with so many conditions, that it could be so limited, so particular, that it could be interpreted in so many cruel and unpleasant ways. I thought that if there was love and that you felt love and you found love, that could only be a good thing in a world that was so full of difficulty and suffering and hatred, but apparently not. And when I did fall in love, of course, and Mrs. Winterson found out, and there was the exorcism, everything, having to leave the church, having to leave home, I was given a choice, and the choice was just to give it all up and come back to heel and behave myself. And same as you, I couldn't do that. Who could when asked to give up love? So I decided I would have to leave home when I was 16 and work things out while I went on with my education. And that, of course, is when Mrs. Winterson said, just tell me why you're doing this. Why are you doing this to me? It was always all about her. And I said, look, I don't know. I'm not doing it to you, but it makes me happy. And she said, why be happy when you could be normal? Because she was a violent philosopher. And I left home thinking, happy, normal, normal, happy. Is this a binary? Is it real? And I thought about it for years. I lived with it for years. I worked with it for years. But it did occur to me that Mrs. Winterson, who possibly the least normal human I've ever met, I mean, how many people do you know that keep a revolver in the duster drawer and the bullets in a tin of pledge? Quite. But this was a woman who somehow really believed she was normal. But I know she was never happy. And if she was the least normal person I've ever met, she was certainly one of the most unhappy, because she was one of those women who was far too big for her tiny life and who just had to crouch under the shelf of it, never able to stand up straight to her natural size, never able to lie down and stretch out. She was a woman who was caught and stuck in her world. And I could have saved her, but I didn't have time, because being Mrs. Winterson, she managed to die in the second episode of Oranges on the BBC. I think she did it on purpose. But I wasn't 30, and how old was she? Not so much older than me now. But she went, and that was that. So there was no room for manoeuvre there. It was gone. And obviously it was only much later, when my father died, that I began to work with some of that material again in Why Be Happy, to try to understand a little more about it. And what I know now, or from where I am now, something that is clear to you, I'm sure, you know, there's all the talk about time's arrow, and we imagine that time runs in a straight line and you can't step in the same river twice and blah, blah, and on we go. But I think in our experience that time is not an arrow. I think time is a boomerang, and it keeps coming back and back and back. And you know, as you get older, it's a very strange phenomenon that memories no longer sit chronologically in the mind. They don't sit like a calendar or a diary. They sit according to emotional significance, sometimes not significance not even clear to us until one memory triggers another, which to an outsider might seem random, impossible. But to our emotional self, there is a deep and real connection. And that's how we remember. Our minds are not like a motorway, a freeway. They're more like a maze. They move around. And the mind itself is not very interested in clock time. And again, that is why fiction works so very well, because you can spend the whole of the book in a single day, or you can pass through lifetimes, all contained, connected, both compressed and expanded in these pages. And part of the satisfaction that we feel, it's not just the content, whatever that story is. It's because somehow the processes of the mind and the processes of our emotional memories are mimicked in the way that fiction works. This capacity to move around in time and not get caught in a linear way, but to lift experience out of the linear and into the spatial, which is why content in the end seems to matter less than something more elusive, the structure, the style, the voice. We don't usually remember the whole story of something that we've read. It becomes more like a poem. There's just a little bit that we take with us, isn't there? A nugget or a talisman, something that we do carry with us, that we return to. We condense it down into something that is necessary for us. And then, of course, it just expands again when you need it to, because just as our imaginative life is not caught by time, our imaginative life isn't caught by the normal rules of space either. So things do expand, things do compress. And you know how it is. Sometimes a memory that was so important dwindles to almost nothing. Something that was really insignificant is suddenly blown up and changes everything about the way that we see things. Because we don't visit memory the way we visit an object in a museum and we know it will always be there and it'll always be the same. Our past seems to change as we do. That was Freud's great insight, that the past as a fact could not be changed, but the past as part of our story and the impact of the story on us, that could be changed. And that insight is where we are now, what we understand now, which should be the most freeing thing that we know. And as I said right at the start, when I came on to talk to you, is under assault from an outside world that wants things to be fixed, that doesn't want them to be propositional, that doesn't want you to be able to change the end, that doesn't want you to have outcomes that are in your control. But anyone who works creatively knows that the thing to avoid is a kind of inevitability, a sort of cliche of outcome. Sometimes a story gets its own momentum and it's leading you inexorably towards an event, an action, a conclusion that you don't want. And as a writer, you think, you stop this, not having that, and you pull it back. But it takes a lot of energy to do that, and it does in our lives as well, because we're pulling away from the force of cliche, And I wrote Written on the Body that it's the cliches that cause the trouble, that we do not want to get stuck in assumptions that we've never questioned, in a life that we don't want to live. People say, well, it's all right for you because you've got lots of privilege, and I do now, but I didn't then. And look, I don't think I'd be able to get out if I was a woman in Afghanistan. I don't know what I'd do. But mostly we're not. And so this imaginative life, it's not just that you change things for yourself, it's a rebuke to a world out there that wants to control the narrative and claims that it can. Got any questions?